we have over 100 tech-oriented legislations that were not written together. And legal uncertainty is the enemy of investment.
I think there's a huge difference between what we say we are doing the paper and what we actually are doing.
I think the reason why we don't have this political will today is that we don't trust each other.
We should think small first, because we see so many regulations for the bigger companies.
We need to really agree on this because we need to get into action and doing less of the diagnosis.
Let's talk about making Europe practical and making Europe work.
Hello and welcome to the heart of the European Parliament here in Brussels. My name is Jeanette Baljeu. I'm the director of Epicenter, a network of 12 leading free market think tanks from across Europe. Almost 2 years ago, now from the Draghi report, and Europe is still stuck pretty much in the same place. Leaders from across the political spectrum can agree on the diagnosis, which is too little productivity growth, too much fragmentation of the single market, too slow on capital markets union, and too rigid on services. But when the conversation turns into the cure, the consensus suddenly disappears. On one side, you have often the northern liberals who want to cut red tape, complete the single market, and let firms scale. And on the other side, often southern European believers of dirigism who want state investment and industrial policy, and often common EU borrowing. The question is whether the divide is a real clash of economic philosophies or whether national interests dressed up as ideology. And to discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome Jeanette Baljeu MEP, representing the Dutch Liberal Party VVD in the Renew Group. Great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, very warm welcome to Dr. Diana Nasuela, who's a research expert at IES Europe, the Romanian partner think tank of Epicenter.
Thank you.
Great to have you on board. And welcome to Carl Vincent Weimers, who is the European Affairs Manager at Timbro, Swedish Epicenter member think tank.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you all. Jeanette, I would like to start with you because as an MEP, you're working on all these issues and competitiveness is really in the middle of the European discussions right now. Do you think this north-south divide is a genuine divide that exists? Or is it really a clash of economic ideology but dressed up in a national contour?
Yeah, well, I don't talk that much into divisions. Of course, we see a little bit of ideology, we see a little bit more competitiveness or more state involvement. These are some issues that you, of course, see. But I think the question really is where do we stand and where do the member states stand in truly want a single market? So the divide is more, do we really want to work on this or not?
And how do you see it? Does the Parliament really want to work on this?
The Parliament definitely. So from Parliament side, of course, you see also national interest, but you see that Parliament in the end is one voice and not 27 member states. The end result of a vote in Parliament is one voice from Parliament. So we see the urgency, we see the need to go to a single market more than we have. And especially when we look around in geopolitics. I mean, this is important that we are realizing that we need to make a stronger Europe at this point.
So the realization is there, but it
Yes.
has been really now almost 2 years after the Draghi report. And obviously there are some omnibus already underway. There are certain
Lots of
things
omnibuses.
happening.
Yeah.
Indeed, so there are certain things happening, but what do you think the biggest barriers are to fast-paced action at the moment? Is it really just a process that takes a while and we need to be patient and we are on the right road? Or is there something lacking that's making this process a bit more cumbersome and difficult?
I think there's a huge difference between what we say we are doing the paper and what we actually are doing. So driving towards action, execution of the single market, I mean, this is one of the most difficult one, of course. And we really need to work on that. We see too many differences between the 27 member states. On paper, they have agreed on the same issue and the same execution, but it's not. in practice. And of course, the Commission can also do more on enforcement. So I'm looking always pragmatic at these things, and we really need to push for implementation and enforcement.
We will come back to enforcement
so.
because this is crucial. I would like to turn to you, Cor Vincent, because you also have the national perspective. And in your paper, you outline that indeed the diagnosis, there's pretty much consensus now that we are lacking the fast-paced economic growth that we need. But I would like to touch on the kind of national differences with you. Do you see this big north-south divide in practice when it comes to the council opinions? And if so, how do you think we can move on from that?
Yeah, I think this is a bit like the elephant in the room when talking about competitiveness on the European scale, because, I mean, everybody agree what is the problem on the diagnosis. Everybody has agreed and saluted Draghi for this report. But if we look then on the solutions to this, we can see, broadly speaking, what I would say as a north-south divide. Of course, this is like the broad picture. Obviously, it's more complicated than that. I mean, there are like dirigist people or let's say protectionist people in Sweden, and there are market liberals in Spain. But this is, I would say, the broad picture. And I think this has to do, something we have to understand is that this has to do with ideology in the beginning, that we have different ideological traditions, broadly speaking, in the European countries. And I would say in Northwestern Europe, we have a much stronger, let's say, like market liberal traditions, which has also transplanted into the different political parties, not only on the right, but also into the Social Democrats, if you look in, for example, in Sweden or the Netherlands. Whereas in the south and in the east, you find more, let's say, a more geopolitical view on the economy. We see much more concern with scaling, for example, that we lack scale in Europe, but also a more appetite for state intervention to combat market failures. And I think it's very important that we understand those two traditions if we're going to be able to reconcile them in the way. I mean, in the end.
So how do you go about it? When it comes to the solutions, what's the way to reconcile quite different ideological positions?
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to do in this article that I've been writing for the European Liberal Forum is that I'm trying to take a pragmatic view on the proposals here, and I try to acknowledge that both of these sides actually have a point in competitiveness. And I think it has to do with the fact that competitiveness can mean very different things. And both are actually right. I mean, competitiveness can mean internal productivity, something that market liberals has always pushed for, reducing red tape. But increasingly, it can also mean state intervention in order to combat market failures. And for example, I mean, take the example with strategic minerals. There, I believe that the more, let's say, dirigist tradition that we can see in France, for example, they have had a point in stressing that these problems exist. And here I think also that market liberals have something to learn. So what I'm trying to do then, that I'm going from this analysis in proposing 5 concrete reforms that I think that we all can agree on. One of them being like a true capital markets union. I mean, we know that in order to have a capital market union, you need some regulation on the European scale. That means letting go of 27 different regimes, but also accepting the free flow of capital across boundaries. So I think we can learn something from each other here, and we need to really agree on this because we need to get into action and doing less of the diagnosis. That is past now, I would say.
And we will touch on the further recommendations in the paper because they're all very relevant. But I want to use a practical example how this fragmentation in the market can be an issue. Because in the Draghi report, one of the main highlights was the productivity gap between the United States and the EU, especially in the tech sector. And you are essentially our in-house tech expert. So I would like to ask you about how do you see that developing in the moment through all the digital omnibus and the regulations that are currently being reformed? Do you think that this is going to be enough to help with the overall competitiveness of the EU, or do we need to go further?
Well, I think the Draghi report is fundamentally a competitiveness alarm, because it says that the gap, the productivity and innovation gap that we see in the European Union is partly the result of policy changes, of policy choices. But this also means that there are some fixes there, right? There are some things we can look at and we can make them better. So it's not the end of the world. There are things at our disposal that we can do. And when it comes to the digital regulation, I think we have a few problems that we need to look at. And the first one is fragmentation. The fact that we have over 100 tech-oriented legislations that were written by different parts of the Commission and that were not written together. We have definitions that contradict each other, and entrepreneurs, especially the small ones, the new entrants on the market, they need to try and figure all these things out. And then you have another problem, the fact that we are voting on legislation at the level of the European Union. We have the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, but sometimes these regulations contradict other national laws that were already in place when the European Commission passed these. So, for example, you have in France or Germany competition laws that overlap with the Digital Markets Act. So it's very hard for companies to try and figure all the system out. So yeah, I think there are things that we can do. What Carl Vincent said is perfectly correct. We need to agree that this is the problem. And I think most of us here agree that there are issues that we can solve, but we must also look at how we can change them in practice and how we can get rid of some of them if they're not working properly.
So talking about the practice, this is very much your job. So how do you get rid of all this fragmentation within the single market? You mentioned the Commission needs to play a bigger role in enforcement, but does also, or can the Parliament contribute to making the rules a bit more unified and simplified? And is that an acceptable compromise to some of the liberals who often, let's be honest, oppose Brussels centralization?
Well, it depends on how you bring the discussion. If you say we need to more centralize, then yes, from a liberal point of view, you sometimes have this discussion. Although if you say we have to have a rule system which is like helpful to the market, for the market to work, I mean, this is okay. So I sometimes see discussions that come up and then it says, well, more Europe. Well, only more Europe if it's the right regulation. But let's not talk about it. Let's talk about making Europe practical and making Europe work. And if we do that step by step in the regulations, so especially get more regulations than directive, which the regulation is for all the countries in the same way to interpret. With the directives, we see all the gold plating and all the national rulings that there are then. So if you look from a liberal point of perspective, if you bring the boundaries to the market, you have to have some market surveillance. That's okay. And let's make that one, because we are already talking about an internal market, but we're only talking. So let's make sure that there is one regulation for the market.
I think there is a good alignment between Jeanette and Carl Vincent when it comes to regulations over directives. And gold plating indeed has been a major problem across the years. But you also have quite a few other suggestions in your papers. So it's not just regulations over directives, but 4 other policy suggestions that could help with our increasing competitiveness. Would you like to elaborate on some of them?
I can take one example. For example, if you look on research policy, I mean, there is a fundamental problem here as well, that if you compare with the US, for example, that we have not been able to canalize the European funds to what actually produces growth. And if we look here on the difference, it's very clearly striking so that in the US, they managed to canalize their public funding to the spearhead research that actually produce growth. And why do we don't do that in Europe? I think the reason here is that we are too much focused in Europe on, let's say, geographical fair distribution of our funds. And we want all the funds to go equally to all countries. I mean, of course, there is some kind of egalitarian point of view out of this that is that is understandable. But I think this has also produced the fact that we also fund a lot of enterprises that will go bankrupt if they go out on the market in Europe with these kind of state interventions and with this kind of public money. And I think here the general problem that we need to address is that there is a lack of trust between the member states. I mean, my aim of this is I want to show that if we have the political will, we can change things. But I think the reason why we don't have this political will today is that we don't trust each other. And this is something that I think we need to speak out about, because I mean, the general problem is that Sweden, for example, don't trust that if we will have a solely, let's say, criteria based on excellence and academic excellence, that will go like specifically to one country and not to the other. And here we need to agree that we should have this framework only based on excellence and not on geographical distribution. That means also putting a larger amount of trust on the European scale from member states. And here we are not yet, I would say, in the political discussion. I would be interested to hear your views about this as well.
I guess so, if I may respond. I mean, there's a discussion going on how should we define made in Europe, and when it comes to public money, I think it's fair that you say at least some sectors. It depends really on the sectors, but if it comes to defense or anything, you can say it should be made in Europe or with allies of Europe. I mean, these are, of course, discussions that are now going on. So that's on the public money side. And I do agree that there's been, of course, a lot on fair distribution, but if you come to the critical sectors, not every country can have like a sustainable green steels
industry.
Industry,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks. So in the end, if you create the boundaries, the market will look where it would be within Europe the best conditions to have that, or respond from that, or make the transition. So I think on that side it's okay. I think what is even more important and already raised is the capital market. I mean, if we really, the private money is so much more money that is put into innovation. And it doesn't bloom because we don't have this one capital market.
But we have had that discussion for almost 20 years
yeah,
now.
But I
so
think
do you think that there is a political momentum to finally make it happen?
Yeah, exactly. We see the geopolitical situation. We see that we're lagging behind. We now see that it is more possible to have that discussion. So I'm very optimistic that for the future that we will have this discussion in a short time and will be in
just
this
the discussion
mandate.
or the whole...
Also the decisions. Or maybe some countries will make the first step and then others will be joining in a later stage. I mean, these are discussions that we see now because the urgency is here. And in that sense, I'm optimistic. But we also have to look at the private money when it comes to business. Very important that we make sure that private money thrives in Europe.
Yeah.
I think you will probably agree with these statements, but I also want to pick your ideas on how to scale up a lot of SMEs, especially in the tech sector. And one of your recommendations in a recent briefing was to introduce the so-called competitiveness test.
Yeah.
Can you outline what the idea is about and how it would make policymaking better here in Brussels?
So in the European Union, we already look at what the impact of regulation is, but very often we don't do that in order to see if there are many unintended consequences. We do it just to justify the political decision. So my idea in the paper that I wrote for the European Liberal Forum was that we should have mandatory competitiveness and innovation assessments that go a little bit deeper into these issues. So first of all, we should look at what the cost of a regulation is for smaller and medium-sized companies. We should have, together with that, harmonized compliance pathway so that smaller companies can comply with different regulations at the same time, because small companies don't have the legal teams in order to figure out this whole framework. And then we should also have a digital single market board that can solve issues when they appear between different national authorities that have something to say when it comes, for example, to GDPR. which has been interpreted differently across member states. So in order to help these smaller companies, we need to be a bit more flexible and we need to work with them. Small companies throughout Europe work under this compliance overhead that transforms into legal uncertainty. And legal uncertainty is the enemy of investment. As long as it's uncertain, it's very hard for a small company that just got into the market to operate, not knowing if their business model is going to be compliant in 2 years from now. So they can't make any computations. So we need to work with them, and they need to know that if there is a problem, they won't be fined first, but someone will come and help them navigate that problem.
That's almost like a mentality shift when it comes to both policymaking but enforcement of policies.
Yeah.
And I don't want to outsource all our possible solutions to AI, but do you think when it comes to simplification, can AI play a role in that? Can we identify some solutions that get rid of some of the duplications or enforcements? How do you see the next 2 years developing through these new technologies?
Well, it's very needed that we use AI. We know there are already tools on the market and companies that I speak to that are saying, well, we can get the duplication out of the regulation. We can check with the gold plating of a national member state how it differs from what was intended. And I think if we really want to speed up the process, and I've discussed it with the Commission as well, that we should use these kinds of tools. And they're doing it, but I think it can be on a larger scale because we want to go quickly. There's a need for simplification. So I think we can use a lot on this. And if I may react on the small, medium-sized companies, from the Renew Group, we have emphasized that we should think small first, because we see so many regulations for the bigger companies who also need regulation, but the smaller ones we really have to take care of. I mean, the biggest amount of companies are small and medium-sized companies, and they cannot handle it, as well explained. So think from small businesses first, and then build up to what the bigger companies should do.
And hopefully scaling is going to be less of an issue in 5 years than today.
Definitely, yeah.
But there is a big disagreement that some people want to get there through a unified capital markets union and private investment, but others see a major role in essentially state aid and subsidies. So what do you think the right compromise is when it comes to this? You framed it in the north-south divide, but let's stick to kind of the more pro-market versus activist industrial policy mentality. Do you think it's going to be a compromise at the end of the day, or do you think that one side is going to win out on this discussion and kind of go ahead accordingly?
Well, hopefully they're going to be a compromise, because I think that is the only political way forward in changing things. I think the general compromise from a market liberal standpoint here would be that we should create a baseline of completing the single market, creating the capital markets union, unifying the regulations, get rid of gold plating at almost every aspect of the single market, but then have, when it is like motivated, some kind of European intervention. For example, when it comes to the geopolitical dependencies, there we, at least, I think, as market liberals, can accept a certain degree of intervention. But
so what are these areas? So just be very specifically when it comes to...
So firstly, what I'm proposing is a European DARPA, which has been proposed for many years, which would be a scheme to finance spearhead research in national and European defense industries, for example. That is one proposal. I think if we compare that with the current competitiveness fund, that is way too broad. And there we actually see the willingness from governments to, everybody is cherry picking here and everybody wants to get something in it. And this is the wrong strategy for Europe. I mean, this is absolutely how we not should be doing. But we should focus more on the spearhead research. If we do that, then I think we will be able to use the limited public funds that we actually have to something that will increase competitiveness, not just prolonging the life of old firms, which was something we also saw with the Next Gen EU fund.
And Diana, on your end, so if we implement this idea of SMEs first, how does that look like when it comes to tech regulation?
It's something that I'm also arguing for. But there's also the other side of the coin here, because we do not want to punish companies when they become big enough. And with the current regulation, that's kind of what we're doing. You're big enough, you're a gatekeeper, here's more regulation for you to comply with. So that is, in a way, punishing innovation. Because these companies, yes, they hold big shares of the market, but they are there because users like them, because they still manage to provide very good products. So they have all the interest to be better and to become better. And for smaller companies, it would be exactly like that. We would need to be just more flexible with them. We would need to help them, but not, in my opinion, by subsidies, but by having more certainty on the regulatory side. Because as far as I've realized during my research, that's actually what matters the most to companies. To know if things are going to change or not. Because if you have a complex but predictable framework, you can plan around it.
Yeah, and I agree. It's the predictability that is needed for either you're a big company or a small company or innovative or still producing what you have been producing for years. I mean, we set the goals on sustainability, for example, in 2050. We know it's 25 years. And within 25 years, for most of the companies, it's like 2 or 3 major investments to bridge those 25 years and make the next step. So predictability for the coming 25 years would be something really, really important, which is always very difficult. But at least we have to give some certainty in some way, and we have to do it now. And this comes with getting more internal market regulation in the sense that it's more one and not all the different 27. So hopefully we get there soon.
And maybe the EU Inc. 28th regime proposal is going to play a part of it.
Yeah.
I assume depends how the negotiations go.
Yeah.
And I wanted to pick your ideas on Carl Vincent's DARPA, European DARPA proposal as well. So do you think that this is something where some of the northern, let's say, frugal countries can subscribe to some level of industrial policy, at least in the areas where we know that they're not just run by free market policies?
Well, I think you see it now already in the Commission's discussion on what are our critical sectors that we really want to have production within Europe. And on the defense side, the industry, it's very important if we look at today's geopolitics. So, but you also see it in the battery discussion, we see it in medicines, we see it in certain raw material production. So you cannot say we need to do everything, but you have to pick and choose. I mean, this is, and we see this discussion already going on.
Are you worried that we're going to pick and choose too many?
Well, that can be the case, and then I agree. Their national interest, of course, comes in, and that isn't either north or south. That's from all countries. But in the end, I think there's reasoning that we see which sectors do we need to take up, and especially the innovation part. And if you look at the defense industry, of course, it is important that this stream of innovation really helps us to get independent, if it's from defense material, but also energy supply, of course. So these are sectors that are no-brainers that we need to work on as a European Union.
Sure. So let's assume we come back here before the end of the term and we do an assessment of how many of these fantastic proposals have been implemented. If you really need to pick and choose one, which one would you prioritize where you, if you say it's implemented in the way that you describe in your paper, then you're going to be pretty happy about the outcome?
Well, if I have to choose, I would choose the Capital Markets Union. And I mean the Capital Markets Union fully completed with also some obligatory components that member states should provide, for example, investment savings account. We saw that this recommendation already existed from the Commission. Unfortunately, very few countries have adopted this. I think Poland is one of the few exceptions. But I think to actually being able to mobilize European saving capital in order to finance the future technologies, that would be an extremely important step to tackle the falling competitiveness.
So Capital Markets Union.
Yeah.
Diana, specifically on the tech regulation front, what one single thing would you like to see by the end of this term?
It's one, but it can be split in two.
Sure, I will give you that much freedom.
So it's going to be impact assessments, but with the promise and the ability to actually change or get rid of some of the regulation if the outcome is not the desired one.
I take it. Well, you have a bit more influence than our two research experts, so same
Well,
question to you.
I can agree with both, but in addition, I would choose then the one single market, the terrible 10 that the Commission has announced that we should get rid of. Hopefully, before the end of this mandate, it's done. It's only now 10% that the Commission has realized. We have a couple more years to go, but please make sure that we get there to 100%.
Well, I hope to come back in 2 years' time and that we will be there 100%. Well, what really emerges from this discussion between the three of you is that we all know the problems. Everyone agrees that we have an issue, and I think there is a good overlap between some of the solutions as well. Someone does need to carry the torch and make it happen, though. So I hope that will be the next 2.5 years. But thank you so much for openly talking about all these issues and openly talking about the trade-offs as well. That's the difficult part of policymaking. And if you also want to go deeper, then I would recommend that you check out the full chapters by Carl Vincent and Diana. It's all online on ELF's website. And welcome to share your own views in the comments, especially if you work in businesses that really feel the weight of the 27 different rule books that we still very much have in Europe. But for now, a massive thank you to all three of you. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
I hope you have enjoyed it too. If you did, then don't forget to click subscribe and follow Epicenter on all our social media channels. But for now, thank you and see you next month for a new conversation live from the European Parliament.